Joining me now, former U.S. Attorney and Fox News contributor Andrew McCarthy. Andy, always great to see you. What do you make of this?
Morning, Dagan. Well, I wouldn't be celebrating it if I was at the White House. I think there's two different things going on here, which is natural since we have two different sets of prosecutors looking at this. The case in the Manhattan U.S. Attorney's Office, the Southern District of New York case, as far as the president is concerned, that really involves campaign finance violations. And what I'd be concerned about is if you read the sentencing memo the Southern District filed, it, number one, looks like a celebration of the campaign finance laws and how important they are to our system. There's a lot of people don't like the campaign finance laws, but they are the law, and the Southern District really champions them in a big way. I think that's important because it's clear that they have implicated the president in the two campaign finance violations that Cohen pled guilty to and will be sentenced on. They have the president basically directing Cohen to commit these offenses. Right. So, you know, these are two felonies that this guy pled guilty to, and they have the president directing it. Now, the standards are different for the candidate than they are to other contributors. So there's some profound legal issues about whether the fact that Cohen is pled guilty to these offenses means the president is implicated in something that, as to him, is a crime, but he's certainly within their crosshairs on that. So that's something to be concerned about. I think on the Mueller end, which is one separate case in connection with Cohen and also the filings that we got yesterday on Manafort, it seems to me, Dagan, that they've changed their theory. I mean, we've had a constant moving of the goalposts from the beginning when collusion supposedly meant a conspiracy between the Trump people and the Kremlin in order to hack the election. In other words, to do this cyber espionage plot that affected the Democratic email accounts that were ultimately put out by WikiLeaks. They don't have that. I don't think they've ever had that. Seems to me that they've now moved to a theory that the Trump campaign was penetrated by Russian intelligence and by the Kremlin, and that what they may be trying to do is show that on the Trump end of that, officials of the campaign and maybe ultimately the administration were irresponsible in how they handled those contacts. And we're talking about people like Manafort here. That's all very interesting. It wouldn't be a crime.
Right. I was going to say,
but it could be obviously very embarrassing.
Right. I was going to say, I think Alan Dershowitz said there's a sin and then there's a crime. So show me the crime. He said that last night on Tucker.
Right. Yeah, well, there are mortal sins and venial sins, too. But, you know, I think they're trying for a mortal sin here.
But what you're laying out to me, I think that the focus on any campaign finance violations, and correct me if I'm wrong, they're usually not criminal, correct? They're usually not treated, campaign finance violations, as criminal charges. But you look at what is in the filing here in the Southern District of New York versus what is in the filing from the Mueller team, and you see the tentacles, how far afield this investigation has gone. It originally, the special counsel's mandate was what? To look into collusion with Russia, to essentially, as you said, hack the election. But now you have something altogether different, basically potentially being a problem for the president.
Yeah, I think you're quite right about that. It's also the history of special counsel investigations. You know, they start here, and then 3 or 4 years down the line, they end up someplace that's often remote from where they started. The other interesting thing along those lines that you mentioned, Dagan, the campaign finance stuff is usually not handled as a felony prosecution. I think that's characteristic of a lot of what's going on in this investigation. So you have these FARA violations, the Foreign Agent Registration Act, which is typically not handled as a felony prosecution. In this investigation, they are. You have basically everybody who tells a lie to an FBI agent has been, it seems, prosecuted for lying to the FBI. That's not typically how these investigations go.
But it
so
would,
they obviously
Andy,
have ratcheted up.
No, continue, and then I'll follow up on that.
I was going to say they've ratcheted up the formal standards of criminality, or the very technical standards of criminality, in this investigation versus other investigations. And I think what upsets people is the difference in the quality of justice that Hillary Clinton got versus what is happening to the Trump campaign.
Right. Well, you said that you were talking about the theory of Russia's involvement in the election and how that's morphed, and then you see the screws being put to one individual after another and finding a process crime to basically put pressure on these individuals. So that's another thing that really bothers people.
Yeah, and, you know, the process crime here is different, I think, than other independent and counsel investigations of administrations. For example, with respect to the Clinton investigation back when, in the Lewinsky scandal, the thing that the independent counsel was assigned to investigate and got permission to investigate was the obstruction that Clinton was involved in and that Lewinsky was implicated in. Here, what's happened is the investigation itself by special counsel Mueller has created these process crimes after he was assigned to it. So it's not like he was assigned to, you know, go find this process crime and people lied about that. He was assigned to basically see if there's a conspiracy between the Trump campaign and the Kremlin, and the process of that investigation has created these other crimes.
Andy, before we move on to something else, what are next steps here? What should we watch for? Of course, the Mueller report, but what else?
Well, I think we're looking at a likelihood of more charges down the line. Both the Southern District case, Dagan, and Mueller's investigation, if you read these two documents that we got, they talked about active grand juries. I think they said that Manafort, for example, was in the grand jury as late as November. And the Southern District also talked about pending investigations that are going on in the office that Cohen's information was relevant to. So I think we're going to see more charges.
And when do you think the Mueller report comes out? Any idea?
No, I don't think he's in as big a hurry as a lot of people seem to think. I do think it's winding down because a lot of these people who would be cooperating witnesses, like Flynn, for example, he's allowing them to be sentenced. And as a prosecutor, you usually want the cooperators to testify in court before you sentence them. And the fact that he's letting Flynn, for example, get sentenced indicates to me he's not planning any big proceeding that he thinks Flynn would be a witness at.
Well, I want to move on to this because we've kind of touched on it, but we have the incoming chair of the House Judiciary Committee, Jerry Nadler, vowing to shut down the GOP probes. Listen to what Congressman Nadler had to say.
When you become chairman, are you officially going to end this investigation?
Yes.
Why?
The entire purpose of this investigation is to cast aspersion on the real investigation, which is Mueller. There is no evidence whatsoever of bias at the FBI or any of this other nonsense they're talking about.
Well, other than text messages and unanswered questions, and again, a Clinton Democrat-funded, unverified dossier put together by an individual who was out to get Trump, which we know from Bruce Orr. Andy, your reaction to that? What is this justified by Nadler shutting down these investigations?
I don't think it's justified, but it's to be expected. I mean, the Democrats' political position has always been that the investigation of the investigators is a distraction and something that's being concocted in order to undermine the credibility of Mueller's investigation. So since that's been their position, I think it's to be expected that they shut it down. But it seems to me, Dagan, that President Trump has always had the wherewithal to release the documents that the committee has asked for. So even if the Democrats shut down the investigation, the president can still put that information out, and then, you know, what gets done with it at that point, we'll have to see. The Senate could continue to investigate it, even if the Democrats won't investigate it in the House. And then looming over all this is an inspector general's investigation at the Justice Department of these matters, which certainly seems to suggest that the inspector general doesn't think this is a bunch of nonsense, even if Jerry Nadler does. And then we also understood that when Sessions was Attorney General, he assigned a prosecutor, Mr. Huber, in Utah, to also have a look at all this to see if there were criminal implications. So I don't think this is over by any means.
Andy, you were reading my mind. That's why I was so excited that you were on the show this morning. You were reading what I wanted to know before we have to go to break. Andrew McCarthy, incredible as always. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Dagan.